You know, for the longest time, when I was starting out in 40k and I was scrolling through all the different armies and trying to make my selection, I had a bit of a mixed feeling with all of the armies I was seeing. They all seemed to have just one thing that I truly was missing and I truly wanted to see in an army. And it was an absolute nightmare to have to continuously juggle up between Death Guard, Thousand Sons, World Eaters, Imperial Agents, anything really. It was a nightmare. But it was only when I saw the Orks, but mainly the Beast Snagger side of the Orks, that I knew they were for me. I wanted to throw some of their painted models on the table as fast as possible and see this savagely brutal side of the Orks come out in full flavor. But eventually it fell on me that there just really wasn't enough competitive Beast Snagger Ork models, or really any Beast Snagger models, to make a full army that wasn't going to cost me my entire arm and my soul and my house along with it. So basically, all my hopes and dreams died the day I knew that any Ironstorm player would just send their unnecessarily high AP weapons up my Orky ass. And I really wasn't able to ever take a competitive Beast Snagger list at the time. But when the 10th edition Ork Codex finally came out, I saw the beautiful, gleaming light of my savagely sexy savior, the Big Hunt Detachment. An Ork detachment solely based off the madness, crazy, and infumed rage of the Beast Snagger Orks, and incorporating everything about their lore, from killing the biggest and baddest prey, incorporating squigs, thump guns, primitive weapons and choppers, everything, you name it. I had everything. But sadly, the same problems still remained. There just wasn't enough Beast Snaggers to make a truly thematic list, and there really just wasn't an option for me to truly take that many Beast Snagger models. But this time, I didn't listen to what GW was offering, and I put down my premium grade Virgin card, and I said, fuck you GW, if you won't give me enough Beast Snaggers to make a thematic list, I'm just gonna have to do it myself. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where the Bling Tooth Gits were born. Yes, that's right. Today, I'm finally giving you a look at my custom Ork army that I've been building over the last couple of months, and I'm very, very happy to finally show you guys what's been going on, the models I've created, and most importantly, my future plans on how the project is going to go. Now, yes, you may be looking at this and going, that's not all Beast Snaggers, but the point I'm trying to get across here is that, well, I forgot to mention in the introduction, basically, that I also have another love in the Orks, and that's going to be the Bad Moons, and I wanted to combine these two aspects of the Orks together to create basically an Ork army every time I look at, my pants would drop. And so I finally created an army that I can look upon and feel proud of, and not necessarily feel like it's dull, bland, or missing any culture or feeling, but instead feel like I created that to a value that only sits with me, and maybe doesn't sit with the vast majority of other people who are versing my army or seeing that army, even on this YouTube video. But today, all I'm really going to be doing is giving you a little bit of an analysis and a deep dive on each individual character I have in my army. All the custom made figurines, the minis I've painted, why I'm going with the schemes they are, and a little bit of backstory, like I said, on how they operate inside and outside of the tabletop. But I've done plenty of talking already. I don't want to waste any more of your time giving you this long ass introduction. Let's jump straight in with how my characters have come together. Now, who better to start with than the leader of the Blitzfang Gits, and the warlord to my army, Glintnak Grim Daka. Now, this Orky war boss wasn't ever really like most Orks. You see, most Orks follow the traditional culture measures. You're born in a culture, or you find a culture, or you appreciate them, and you mainly stick with them. Sure, you might transition around here and there, but the majority of it is that you stay within a confined of a select number, if not one, of the culture. Or if you break off of the main culture and start like a subculture or a war band where it's only like a lot less Orks, most of the time it's going to follow a very similar theme to the main culture you split off of. As well, Glintnak didn't really go with that. He more or less kind of threw his care to the wind and went with every single culture. And the sad part is he was never really fully invested into one. His teeth never grew as much as the Bad Moons, and more importantly, the guns he was wielding never really grew on him as much as the other Bad Moons were saying he did. He was never really the first one into battle and knocking heads about like all the other goths he was part of, obviously in Orky standards. and he never really liked looting that much, so the death skulls just didn't really give him that spark he was looking for. And sure, he liked going fast, but definitely not as much as his fellow warbikers did when they were charging into battle. And eventually he came to the conclusion that he was not necessarily a follower of a warband or a culture or a war boss, but he was a leader, and he was going to prove that to every single orc. So he set out to the wasteland, or whatever planet he was on, with his kind of weirdly trusted Gretchen, who went by the name Snazgob, who had a very strange ability to somehow control wild energy, even though it wasn't very fluent at the time. He went out, and with his knowledge he had gained from both the Bad Moons and the Snakebites, he was able to forge an arsenal so dangerous and so terrifying that even the biggest and baddest war bosses he chose to go up against had to look twice at what exactly they were choosing to fight when going up against this new cunning orc. Fusing the power of the Bad Moon's high technologically advanced, ego-filled maniism behavior to create not only his high volley power Gatling cannon, which he used in many different ways, but also his high advanced augmentations and armor, which he used to level any playing field when fighting other orcs, but also fusing together the likes of the Snakebite's feral and mad driven behavior to not only create his single-handed axe, which he used to destroy any orc in single-handed combat, but also sprouting to an insane size similar to Ghazgol's insane growth due to his victory and feral nature that he implemented when in single-handed combat. All of this allowed him to defeat any orc and smack any orc into the right place if need be. Now, of course, the orcs he attracted from this protest, from the battling he was doing, from the victories he was scoring, was obviously Bad Moons and Snakebite, who had either been left or abandoned from their original clan, or had chose to completely just ditch their current warband and come over to check out what was going on with this new Glintnak character, and what exactly he meant by combining cultures. So now obviously when they came together they were quite confused, they didn't really like each other, and obviously orcs being orcs, they fought in between each other. But Glintnak was not going to have that, as he knew from the very start that cultures could be combined, as he had done for so long now. So he smacked a few orc heads right into place, and he was able to combine them. And eventually the orcs not only started to get along with each other, but also started to rub off. And due to this forced friction and socializing enforced by Glintnak himself, we actually started to see different traits in the cultures. Not only were the Bad Moons adopting a more feral mindset and maybe even switching to a couple of clubbing instead of a Daka, but also the Snakebites were starting to take interest in the shiny new toys that the Bad Moons were taking home, thus being the birth and the very first uprise of the Bling Fang Gits. Now, as for the actual model of this, Ghazgol, or Glintnak as I call him, I love this model. I got him off Etsy, and he's supposed to represent, obviously, like I said, Ghazgol in the tabletop. And Snazgob is obviously a Makari, but, you know, custom as we call it. These guys are fantastic. I love both the Etsy model. It's fantastically printed. Honestly, it encompasses both the savage, primal, feral aspect of the Beast Snaggers, but also encompasses the mechanical, like, high technology, high armored, full warhead Daka aspect of the Bad Moons so perfectly. I was looking through and I was literally just thinking, like, what is the best orc model I could find? And this popped up and I was like, damn, I know this is the one. So that's why he's here. Makari was built off of the Squig Hopper set that I used for my other models in my army, and he was kind of like a side piece from there. I just thought the Bad Moon staff fitted him perfectly. I didn't have a Makari at the time, so I kind of customly built one by myself, and lo and behold, he actually made quite a good little Makari there. But that's enough about the warlord of this army, and we know how the Bling Fang Gits came together, but let's talk about some perfect examples of how the cultures actually did eventually start rubbing off against each other in terms of Glintnak smacking their heads in a couple too many times. Next, I want to talk about my two beast bosses and the boys that chose to follow them. Mainly, I want to talk about Crag Smasher Glitzmore and Rockfist Shiny Tooth, and how these orcs are supposed to represent the exact idea of changing and switching in between cultures to accept different values even when you believe so heavily in one certain case, and more or less basically the impact that Glintnak had on these orcs by simply just following what he knew was best for him and combining cultures to create not only a powerful arsenal but also a very powerful leading dictatorship. This is perfectly what I would understand as orcs who chose to change instead of just following their ways, more or less because they would have get their head smacked in if they didn't. These two orcs perfectly represent what Glitnak wants to see and what he means by culture fusing and culture combining. He wants to see these kind of orcs in his army to create the best well-rounded arsenal possible so that all fronts are covered when he's in battle, both in long range through high-powered shells and close range between high fury mentalities. Now, the very first orc on this list is going to be a very proud beast boss known as Crag Smasher. Now, this beast boss, even being exiled from his clan, still believes that these primal and feral ways is what's truly going to carry him and his boys to victory, and he believes that wearing the skulls of his enemies not only makes him a better fighter, but also a better general. So as you can see, a pretty nasty feral boy, as you can see there. And he also believed that he would never, ever take a piece of Daka to hand, but would only ever be wielding his massive warhammer known as Kitbashed, but also have his friendly, trusted Toe Gnasher as his little squid companion along with him to do exactly what his name demonstrates. But when he met Glitnak and he was forced into the idea of these gits known as these bad moons, these orcs that would choose to use Daka over primal weapons, he was disgusted. But eventually, obviously through force from Glitnak, he did start to see the likelihood and the actual effectiveness of these long-range weapons, these shooting mechanical objects. So, through a bit of force, but also a bit of convincing, he picked up himself a massive shock cannon. Now, obviously, this gun was very heavy, so he used his Toe Gnasher squid companion to help carry it around. And he found that this weapon was not only devastating, but also allowed him to make so much more damage through long-range combat, and then easily be able to get up into close-range combat with his Kitbashed. He knew that this was going to be his way, so he donned not only a cape to prove his Bad Moon signature, but also even adopted the logo of the Bad Moons to see and combine the likes of the cultures to become not only a feral git, but also a slugger wielding maniac. Now, this beast boss I absolutely love. He's a little bit of a build of what's he called? Ulfjack Blackhawk, obviously making him a bit more feral, but also combine the idea of it being a Bad Moons boss. It was a perfect augmentation. Obviously, the lore doesn't match up with how I made him, but I honestly think it's a fantastic model. If I was going to recommend one thing for like building beast bosses, it's going to be definitely the models I have. Fantastic model if you're going to like trying to get some orc changes, because his body is so adaptable. You can really change his snaz hammer, fits so many themes, and yeah, it's pretty easy. A different story can be drawn from the likes of Rockfist, a crazed but very proud and very prominent Bad Moons war boss who, let's just say, had a bit too much Daka for his own good. You see, Rockfist was a very powerful general who wielded a handheld shot cannon that could be charged up into different levels of strength to do tons of damage to the enemy forces. But you see, when on the battlefield, Rockfist preferred just to go into a crazed maniac state and shoot what was ever in front of him, sometimes this being friendly orc vehicles, friendly orc infantry, or even his own boys at certain times. And let's just say the higher ups in this clan were sick and tired of having to pay so many teeth for not only the enemy's damage, but also Rockfist's crazed maniac state's damage. So he was exiled to the wasteland along with a bunch of boys who loved him to death. But you see, Rockfist didn't really care, because as long as he was shooting up something, he had a bunch of say that Glitnak was not going to let this opportunity slide through his fingers. Seeing a Bad Moon that was already so crazed and feral in the head, he knew it would only take a couple of twitching and tweaking before this war boss was a fully fledged Bling Fang Git. Now obviously at the start, Rockfist didn't really appreciate the idea of having to switch cultures or even combine anything with the likes of melee combat. Sure, he had his fair hand-to-hand share here and there, but he obviously didn't like the idea of having that as one of his main uses of combat. But obviously, as time went on and as battles passed between the Bling Fang Gits, he started to see the likeliness of going through a melee combat phase, as shooting up the enemy became a little bit boring as the clan was a lot smaller and he wasn't able to do as much damage as before. So him and a couple of keen pain boys decided to rip off his only other hand and replace it with a feral primal claw known as Flesh Terror, which was easily one of his most distinguished weapons as we know of now, choosing to don a mask known as a Shiny Tooth mask to allow him to not only become a bit more fused within the Bling Fang Gits culture, but allow him to basically hide his pure primal rage, because combining the likes of a flesh-tearing melee weapon and a high voltage damage shot cannon was a little bit too much for this orc to handle, and the faces and expressions he would make when in battle, let's just say he didn't want any other orcs seeing. Becoming a very powerful and very prominent Bling Fang Gits war boss known as Rockfist Shiny Tooth. This model of the beast boss obviously is originally a war boss, but I did convert him with a couple of changes. Obviously, giving him the power shooter, whatever you want to call it, the shock cannon, but also giving him the mask that I got from a Warbiker set. Now, I think he turned out really well. Obviously, paint job might be a bit iffy. The day I painted him probably wasn't in the best mindset, but I honestly think he's a fantastic model, and I just absolutely love how he's come out. Couldn't really ask for more. It perfectly encompasses the idea of a Bad Moon changing to like a feral, horrible orc who's like getting in there with primal because he's got the mask on. He's got his like massive claw. I think it was perfect. He was already there. And yeah, I really like how he turned out. If I was going to say one thing, another thing to convert, Warboss is perfect because he can be converted into so many different things. Like if you want to go with like a speedy, like a cult of speed, if you want to go with like, I don't know, like death skulls, like you want to go with that stuff, it's perfect. So I'd highly recommend him if you're going for that. This one is going to be my cloud jumpers. Now you see, these orcs perfectly represent the idea of a complete 180 change in mindset due to Glintnak's teaching, where they didn't even just take it a little bit and just like convert, they went the full length and completely changed cultures. Now you see, orcs by themselves don't already like changing cultures and prefer to stay at one single metric, and Glintnak's changing and combining cultures was hard enough, but to see a orc not only go from culture to culture, but go from Bad Moon to Snakebite, two completely different cultures, is, let's just say, very rare at the least. But these cloud jumpers are what kind of the exception brings in terms of culture changing. During the time of the Great Switch, which was basically just a very short time period where all the Blingfang Gits in the newly formed clan wanted to kind of switch over. All the Bad Moons wanted to become more feral, and all the Snakebites wanted to become more technological due to Glintnak's teaching and the kind of strict rules he was enforcing inside of this newly formed clan. And let's just say that the Bad Moons didn't have a very hard time picking up very primal weapons, but the Snakebites did have a bit of a hard time becoming more feral, becoming more technological, and picking up high advanced augmentations, high advanced weaponry, custom shooters, custom blasters, and all these things they were looking to gain. And let's just say the mechs were very happy to incorporate all this and give these new orcs some shiny new toys, but it was a bit of a handful for them overall, as you had hundreds of orcs looking for a new blaster to go along with them. To the mechs' high demand in these new shiny toys that all these orcs were looking for, the Storm Boys who had broken gear, busted blasters, weird choppers, and basically just really bad maintenance gear, didn't really get the pointy end of the mech stick, and could not get their gear fixed because all the mechs were so prioritized with all the new gear they were making for the feral orcs. And after all, what mech is going to want to fix broken gear when they can just make new shiny toys that can do even more damage than the jetpacks that the Storm Boys were holding? And the Storm Boys knew that it was going to take them months, even years, before they would get their stuff fixed. So they took to a bit of a different measure and came up with a bit of a different plan to how they were going to take to the skies in the future. Blingfang Git's camp was nestled near quite large mountain range, which had flying squigs coming in and out in different caves on the mountains. And the orcs actually observed these squigs for a while and saw them carrying extremely large carcasses up there to the mountains, and knew that, hey, if we could get a hold of some of these squigs, we might be able to ride them. Now, obviously, it took them a bit of a while to climb up the mountain, but with a few well-placed rocks, and a few, let's just say, not well-placed rocks, they were able to bring down a couple of squigs. And after a very large tassel, which had a couple of hands being lost, and even a couple of orcs' lives being taken, they were able to gain the squigs' trust, and even start to ride them. Now, they didn't actually ride them, but they more or less held on for dear life as they flew into battle. Now obviously, because all their gear was too heavy and they weren't able to use it very effectively and it was broken anyway, they adopted a bit more primal weapons, the Sky Stabbers, which not only allowed them to be a bit more efficient in the air, but also get critical strikes off on the enemy without having to completely lose the squig when doing so. Eventually these orcs realized that they weren't even really Storm Boys anymore, so they crafted the name the Cloud Jumpers and became the orcs' new primal metric of scouting ahead and being kind of effective in the air, turning them from the Bad Moons they once were to using jetpacks and weapons and sluggers and choppers to riding squigs, hanging on for dear life, and using Sky Stabbers to land critical blows on the enemy. Truly seeing a complete 180 change in not only the Orcs culture, but also the Orcs mindset and what they believed were correct. Now obviously this was through force, but hey, the point still stands. These obviously are my Kitbashed Storm Boys. I love them. They are a bit of a centerpiece, if I'm going to be honest. I love the way they turned out. They're really just good looking models. I can use them. They don't fall over, surprisingly, even though they look like they would. And they're just really nice, strange little like thematic boys that come in and just really allow that whole like aspect of primal and technology to come together in harmony and really just wrap up the whole idea of, alright, squigs, but also weaponry. I really like them. I think they're awesome. And I really want to start using them more on tabletop because, bro, like, I've barely played with them at all, and I want to see them on the tabletop more. And it'd be so fantastic if I could have them, and which I'm mostly going to be doing soon as my army is fully up in there. But overall, these Cloud Jumpers or Storm Boys, yeah, I'm really happy with the way it turned out, and I really want to get some more of that kind of thematic and truly, like, primal or truly technological Kitbashes in my army. Only problem is, it's very expensive. And so, there you have it. There is my custom Orc army so far. Now, yes, you may look at it and be, it's not painted. All those models aren't tabletop legal. And whatever other retarded complaint you can think up with. But trust me, that's on the way. The painting phase is obviously still far to come, as there is plenty to paint. And I want to put my best effort into it. So, I'm obviously waiting till I'm, like, in the best mindset. And as for tabletop efficient, I do have replacement models for all of them. So, if someone comes up and says, you're not allowed to play with that, then obviously I do have ways of replacing them in very easy manners. So, I hope you really enjoyed this video, honestly. I want to see more custom armies. I would love to come on YouTube and see all of these, like, new armies coming up with people's inspiration. Because, honestly, Warhammer is as best as you make. And sure, you can have your own armies sitting on the tabletop. But honestly, I want to see more armies made from the heart, made from the ideology of your own personal values and what you believe in. And I would kill to even verse another army that was the complete opposite of me and maybe see a bit more of a, you know, culture changing whatever in your army. So all I'm suggesting here is find your passion, take what you love and put it into your Warhammer army, because honestly it's expensive enough as it is, so why don't you just add a little bit of flair to it at the very end. So I'm really happy to have showed you today how the Orc cultures can actually rub off on each other. And if you want to see some more like Orc proper lore about this army and actually like me go in depth about it and like maybe like write something about it and like come up with myself, more than happy to supply that. But obviously that's a bit of a future time from now. So do all the cool YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, do whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Mwah.